the potential that Broadcom is doing an Apple chip. Dan, is this just nonsense, or is there something here?
Well, the cited, it was funny, kind of the site that was cited through the citing of the citing, I think it was like that Tech Power Up site or something, was where at least one of the sites where it was being read on.
Oh my gosh, you mean the same one that said that the Intel yields were horrible and then 5 days later said they were good?
That's exactly. That's okay. Exactly that one. So, you and I both had a little fun on that particular topic, like, but hey, at least they backtracked. I mean, most people just never acknowledge their
true.
I think I'm like, I like gave them like, here's you give them like a compliment sandwich. I'm like, here's a compliment that you owned it. Now I'm going to punch you in the mouth because you're morons. And then I'll give you another prop here by talking more about your stuff that you're publishing. But they're not the only ones publishing this. There is a fairly kind of significant consensus in the market. And remember, and by the way, this actually gets really interesting, Pat, because you saw a report yesterday. I think it was that Apple's got a project to take its own Wi-Fi chips and other specialty components in-house. I don't know if you saw this. I saw it come out yesterday, and meaning that they're going to take some of that business back from Broadcom, apparently. So this is like this push-pull with Apple, because Apple and Broadcom allegedly have a pretty healthy, I'm sure there's some, hard negotiating that goes on between those companies, but like compared to the Apple Qualcomm relationship, much more cordial. I even think Apple Broadcom, like about a year ago, announced a fairly significant continued partnership around a number of different, DSP, Wi-Fi, other technology that they work on together. And by the way, the stuff that they work on together is hard. The stuff they work on with Qualcomm is hard. The stuff they work on with Broadcom is hard. There's a reason Apple hasn't done it, because if anything that's easy, Apple will do itself. They will vertically integrate. So going back to that point is, because the relationship has been pretty kosher as far as as I've been aware, there was a lot of consensus that Apple was going to tap Broadcom. Now, kind of a little bit more histrionics here is that, remember, Apple didn't go the NVIDIA path.
Yeah.
Like Apple has not, I'm not saying they're not using any, but I'm saying like Apple has been pretty steadfast that it is doing most of its own training, most of its own, it's using Google TPU. The likelihood of it 100% building a dependency to do its own training and inference on only a Google product is almost as improbable as them doing it on an NVIDIA product. Apple is not a company that ever wants to be captive. And I think through some of the lessons we've learned with RF and with Wi-Fi and these other tech that they're trying to take in that they haven't been able to, is that eventually if Apple can, Apple will. So everyone else is doing it. Meta's doing it. Google's doing it. AWS is doing it. ByteDance is doing it. Alibaba's doing it. Of course, Apple is going to do it. So the only real question here is, are they going to do it with Broadcom? And, I think the bottom line is, we talked about this earlier. We'll talk about it again later. There's only two companies they could do it with. And so, the reason I put some merit behind this is there is history here. There's a strong history. There is a good relationship. Apple does sort of fit that. Talked about Hawk and Charlie have talked about these more consumer-focused companies building specialty AI chips. So the pieces to the puzzle fit. The history, the moving forward, Apple's vertical integration strategy, Broadcom being the cloud optimized silicon provider for a lot of these consumer applications. And by the way, Apple, for whatever reason, keeps ripping to new highs. Apple Intelligence sucks. I don't know what. It's early. I realize I'm taking a breath here, but I've not seen anything compelling about this. The super cycle's been meh, if it exists at all. Intelligence sucks. I'm not quite sure. And again, I know I'm always this Apple, but I just don't know why this of all the names is ripping so hard. They've literally now worth $500 billion more than NVIDIA in the last several weeks. This company just keeps going up. But the ability for it to vertically integrate, build its own AI silicon should be an expectation. It's going to be part of its profit pool. It's going to be part of how it eventually builds models and trains. And by the way, Pat, the last thing I'll say is, I don't believe this OpenAI partnership is for the long term. I just do not buy it. I do not buy that Apple is going to just defer all of its meaningful engagements with its customer off to the OpenAI platform. I think this is a stopgap for the company. And this is part of that process to doing more of their own, building more of their own. And I think in the beginning, it'll be very inference centric, but they've eventually got to train models, because the early the early use cases for Apple Intelligence just doesn't meet the need.
Yeah, good stuff there, Dan.
Thanks.
I mean, you pretty much drained this one for all it's worth. I always thought it was kind of hokey when Apple Intelligence came out and they said that they had, servers in the cloud, that it seemed like it was a private server, not a virtualized server, and that just seemed completely weird to me and unscalable. And what was up there essentially were Apple chips, right? There was likely an AWS, as we learned about the tight coordination between the two of them. One of my biggest questions is, where would this chip sit, right? Would this sit at AWS? Is Apple somehow going to get good at doing infrastructure, which they're not? And let me tell you why they're not good at infrastructure. Or let me just say that they're good at infrastructure on stuff like streaming, okay? Which is, if you look at where does most of the Apple compute actually happen, it's streaming content. It's music, it's movies, it's apps, it's stuff like games. And that's just not that hard, folks, right? That's really all they've had to do. And even, backups, right, for your iPhones. That's pretty first order stuff and not difficult at all. So big question is, are they going to start hiring a bunch of, AWS, Azure, Google rock stars to actually create and run their own infrastructure in these hyperscaler data centers? My guess is that the design of this AI chip, if true, would be very leveraged on all of its basically it's client-based AI, just scaled pretty high. You can imagine the price that Apple is paying to do all of its training and all of its inference right now. It's likely being done at the training, I think they were pretty clear, is being done at Google. But it seems to me that the inference and actually running those workloads is coming out of AWS.